Hello, good evening, everyone. Welcome to season 3, episode 19 of the P.W.P Sessions podcast. I'm your host, Noelle Figueroa, and I'm excited to have back as my guest, Margaret Saraco, fellow poet and author. Thank you all so much for joining me tonight. Now, as we begin this episode, for those of you not already familiar, the P.W.P Sessions, or the Pause for Purpose Sessions podcast, is a podcast I created where I conduct interviews with new or established authors of poetry, rappers, or MCs, feature a performance of their work, along with an audience Q&A session. I'm your host, Noelle Figueroa. I'm a poet, author, blogger, workshop facilitator, and event host, and I'm the creator of the P.W.P Sessions podcast. Tonight's guest is returning for the second time. It's fellow poet and author Margaret Saraco, and this is her bio. Margaret R. Saraco is the author of 2 poetry collections, If There Is No Wind and Even the Dog Was Quiet, both from Human Era Publishing, twice recognized in the Allen Ginsberg Poetry Contest and nominated for a Pushcart Prize. Her short stories and poetry appear in journals and anthologies, including Book of Mashes, Greening the Earth, Kerning, Oven Q Siamo, The Path, Borderlands, and Poetry X Hunger. She is a poetry editor for Platform Review. She has been featured in video, Instagram, and podcast projects. Nonfiction work includes Where Feminism Rocks, about the 1990s riot girl movement on the issues, and her book, The Captive, A Prisoner of Its Own Time, reflected on the cultural significance of a 1920s play banned on Broadway for referring to a lesbian character off stage. Now, for more information about Margaret and her work, you can go to margaretsaraco.com. Now, I'd like to introduce, once again, Margaret Saraco. Hey, Margaret, good evening. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm well. How are you?
Excellent, excellent. I'm very well, thank you. Glad to have you back on the show. Thank you so much for returning.
Thank you for inviting me.
Excellent, excellent. So, give the audience, get tonight's audience up to speed with what you have been doing since our last conversation. What have you been up to?
Actually, since our last conversation, I published another book, and I've been involved with doing a lot of spoken word and assembling a novel.
Oh,
I'll just leave
awesome.
it at that.
Excellent.
And
Wow.
trying to figure out which my next poetry book will be. So yeah.
Well, that's excellent. That's outstanding. Congratulations on everything. That's excellent. So for those that may not be familiar with you already, can you share with our audience, like how would you describe yourself or define yourself?
Well, I've always been involved in the arts. Started out actually in music when I was very young. And that morphed into the theater, and then I became a writer. But I've obviously always needed to be creative, and I felt that writing is really centered me for where I need to be. I'm also think of myself as a Renaissance person because I just delve into so many different areas. And it's funny, I actually am also a lifelong educator and an activist, and somehow those 3 really cement who I am at this point in my life. Yeah.
Excellent, excellent. Now, congratulations on your latest release, Even the Dog Was Quiet. Very interesting title. Can you share with our audience, how did you come up with the title and the motivation for this project?
Sure. So after the first book, I had written a lot while I was working, while I was a teacher, public school teacher for 27 years. And during that time I was writing, but it's very hard to assemble a book and be clear. So I did the first one, and 13 months later, this one I had published. But I started to think about, there's a lot of my work where I feel like it's in hushed overtones. Like there's something that is just like on the brink of happening. And, it's that, oh my goodness moment. So I actually wrote a poem called Risk. And in that poem, there's this line is, part of that. It's and I did the same thing with the other book. I took a line from a poem. So, you know, when all the stuff that's going on, if the dog is quiet, there's a problem. And the whole collection really centers around those kinds of topics that just make me a lot of unease and sometimes dis-ease of the world. So that's where the title comes from pretty much.
And what was the process like for you putting together this collection? Was there necessarily any difference between the process of putting together this second book as opposed to the first book? Like, how would you describe the process?
Well, while I was doing the first book, I actually was also involved with assembling a book for a contest, and I had become a semi-finalist for that contest while I was publishing the first one. And so this one was actually, I started to work on this one at the same time. And so it was a little bit frantic. But once I didn't get that, you know, I didn't get that contest, I thought, well, now, wait a minute, let me really take a look at this. So the process was a little different. Somehow with your first book, you let, like, people will let certain things go, but the second one, you know, you just have to be that much more careful. So I started to see a theme emerging that I liked, and I just ran with it. And then my husband is also an illustrator. You can see here, he did the cover of the book, which is beautiful. It's actually a railroad station during the pandemic, and the railroad stations, there were no trains running. So there was an isolating feeling to it, very bizarre. And then inside the book, we actually broke it up with drawings. So there are like 8 sections with drawings, just to give, because sometimes it gets a little heavy and intense. So I wanted to give some air and space in there as well. So this was very different, I think, than the first book. For me, the process was different.
Wow, that's excellent. How did you decide which poems were going into this collection?
That's always the hardest part, you know. It's like I started out with a bunch, and then when I was done, I'd say probably maybe 60% of them I kept and 40% I eliminated. I just kept looking for themes, and I ended up finding that it was going across my life, and that there were poems that were written when I was a very young child, all the way up until now. So I started to do almost a chronological movement of the work, and that was interesting. And that's how I started to break it up, was kind of like by time. And then certain things just, you know, there were certain, I like to also have some things that have humor in them. I like the balance of that. But there are definitely some funny poems that I left out. I just felt like it's not for this book, and maybe another one, you know. But it's like, you know, it's like birthing. It's like, it's so intense, right? It's your baby, and you're trying to figure out how to do it right. And, you know, right is whatever, subjective and objective and all of that. But yeah, I don't know. It's I did leave a lot on the cutting room floor, and it's still as many pages. It's interesting as the first book, but there are a lot more longer poems, and I felt like I had the ability to put those in there, which I really like.
Excellent, excellent. Now, in terms of the subject matter, would you say your subject matter for this book is similar to your previous book, or did you happen to explore new themes or different themes?
You know, it's funny. I think we talked maybe the last time too about, you know, the first subjects I ever wrote about. And I have a tendency to write about what I'm curious about and what keeps me up at night. It's like my anxiety and, you know, the world around us, which is very anxious. I'm very anxious about that now. Of course, we all are, I think. But I do write about love and family and relationships, and I write about politics and rights and all of the isms, you know, the sexism, and all of it. You know, I can't seem to pull myself away from that. So while the subjects are the same, I think this one has more, I'm not even quite sure, like more of a sometimes nightmare quality to it, I'd say.
Would you say that there's certain subjects that you gravitate to more than others?
Human nature and nature. I think those are the two that I keep coming back to. And sometimes the conflict between them, you know, that there was an article today in the paper about how animals had come back during the pandemic when people ended up in their homes. But that there is so much more to it than that. Because, you know, we were driving down a highway and I saw a family of ducks, like an interstate, and there were a family of ducks like trying to cross the street. It was the most bizarre thing. And even in our yards around here, there were animals coming out we hadn't seen before. And it's all of that, like just to be able to observe, because I don't feel that we're here alone and we coexist. And humans have so many issues. And we also impact nature because of that, you know. So I think it's those two themes that keep coming up for me.
Excellent,
think
excellent. So. What has the response been to this project? Like, what have people been saying about this particular project?
They like it, you know. They like the style that I write. I really try to invite people in, and there are a lot of family stories. So sometimes friends will say, you know, gosh, this is so you. It's like I'm sitting in the room and I'm hearing you tell these stories. Other people are pretty taken with the diversity of subjects, but that this whole idea that there's just an easiness of the world keeps pulling us back into it. Yeah, I think it's been a very good. It's been very good. And I like to paint a lot of pictures. So some people talk about my writing like I'm doing ekphrastic writing, like I'm responding to images constantly. And they also like the drawings inside, that it really helps them get to the next section or break it so that they feel like they can move to the next piece. Yeah, so it's been very positive so far.
Oh, that's excellent.
Continue that way, right?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. But that's good to know for sure, for sure. Is there any poem in particular from this collection that stands out to you?
Well, I think that Risk, the one that has the title in it, I think that's really what I ended up centering the book on, was that feeling. Yeah. So Risk it's about when I was very young and there was a lot of very intense and bad things going on in my life. And I just kind of escaped with a friend. And we started, I think we were, I don't know how old we were, probably 22. And we were driving across country together and we didn't know where we were going or what we were doing. And that feeling, I can remember that so clearly, Noelle, you know, it's so vivid. And, you know, it's hard. You go through times and you're just not quite sure when it will be okay again, you know, or if it'll be okay, and how to get back, you know. But here we were literally on the road running away. And that's what that poem is about. Yeah, so I think that's the poem that centers the book.
That's powerful. Do you feel there's a level of transparency in your work that people can immediately gravitate to? Is that your perception?
Yeah, I think so. I think that I really, you know, when I taught math and writing. Those are my two subjects I ended up teaching. And I really always wanted to communicate. It was very clear to me. Like I can really enjoy a lot of poetry, very old poetry and very new poetry, but I really felt like my way is to not to alienate anybody, not to make anybody feel othered, that everyone is kind of welcome into the space, and that, you know, it attracts them or not, it's totally fine, but I never want them to feel off put because they don't understand it. So I really try to make, there's a couple of, you know, poems probably too obtuse and abstract even for me, but for the most part, that's my deal. I want people to come in, and I want, it's like, you know, come in and have a cup of tea with me, you know, let's sit down together. Yeah.
Excellent, excellent. Now, this is your second work or release from Human Era Publishing. For those that are watching or will be watching this episode that may not be familiar with the publishing process, can you share what the process was like for you with working with a publisher, and would you recommend that to someone?
Yes, I absolutely, I actually toyed with self-publishing, especially, before, while I was still teaching, I couldn't get my head around how to get to a publisher. It's like this, catch-22 kind of situation. You don't know how to break in.
Right,
I was publishing work, but to publish a book is like a whole different.
right,
So I met Paul. I was doing a featured reading on Zoom because we were all on Zoom, and he used to go to opens, and we couldn't do that during the pandemic. So we met each other online. He's in Massachusetts, Paul Richmond. He's a beat poet. He's fabulous, actually. I think you
yes,
know him.
definitely,
Yeah.
yes,
And
yes,
yeah,
we
yeah, yeah.
connected.
And that's the way he is. He's got this great personality. Because he's a poet, it made working together so much better, because I never felt like, it was editor, publisher, writer, it wasn't any of that. We were all like in it together, the two of us. And I love the process because I have a lot of autonomy over the work. I like that, but I also love collaborating. So I'd be able to say, Paul, I don't know if this works. What do you think? Like what, like to bounce ideas off of. And after like maybe my fifth email, he'd say, I think we just need to talk. Let's get on a Zoom call. Whereas the rest, yeah, if I was doing this alone, I would just be sitting with that anxiety, and that would be hard. So I loved working with him so much. I pitched this book, the second one. He was like, yeah, let's do it. So I think we really work well together. And I haven't ever heard anyone speak poorly of Seminary Publishing. They're in Western Massachusetts. And he runs reading series and all kinds of things. He really promotes writing in general, believes in the arts, so it's great.
Right. Excellent, excellent. Is there one particular subject that you would say you're passionate about in terms of, your writing?
That's a good question.
Or maybe
I
like a
guess,
topic or subject that's that you gravitate to more than others?
yeah, so it's funny, when I'm writing, sometimes I choose the subject, sometimes the subject chooses me. Because sometimes I write, I don't know what people call it even, I just sit down and I'm not even thinking about anything, and I just start writing because I want whatever just to come out and up. And boy, oh boy, sometimes it's rather intense. I'd have to say in the past few years, it's been very political. Even teaching was very political. It's amazing that it had to be that way, but it was. And of course, all that we're living through, I write about, immigration, I write about racism, I write about reproductive rights and what's happening with everything in the world. Of course, I've even written some that are not in this book, I don't think so much, but about Trump and all of his, all of what surrounds that in the fascist country we are moving towards if we elect him again.
Right.
And wars, so I think that stuff has to come out, just has to. And then I balance it with other pieces. It's once it comes out, it's not as anxiety producing as if I'm just keeping everything inside. So that's one of my reasons for doing that.
Right, right. Now, would you say, given the subject matters that you cover, in general, um, can you share with our audience why do you feel it's important to you that you touch on these subjects?
So sometimes I feel like it's, if I discover something and it might not be out in the world, I want other people to know about it. So I think that the arts can communicate, but in a way sometimes that people can hear it where other places they might not be able to. And then I really feel like people shouldn't feel alone also with their thoughts. Like sometimes it gets to be very intense, and it's yeah, I think it's like a healing. I think I do it for that reason. I really want people to feel you're not alone, and there might be an answer. And if there's not, there's other of us there that are of like mind. I get a lot of that. I get a lot of people that have never read poetry very much that like my work too. But it's just like it's another way to bridge a conversation about, how tough it is.
Right.
Honestly, I can't remember a time it wasn't. I keep thinking back, well, when was it like, when was it okay? When were we okay as a world? So we're constantly having to work on healing. I think I do that through my work. I'm hoping it's helpful for some people.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I'm glad you mentioned that because in terms of healing and the subject matter that you choose to touch on in your writing, you're I'm sure you're fully aware of the climate that we're in. There's this massive campaign of censorship and the banning of books and things of that nature. Now, as a poet, right, how important do you feel it is that us poets, use our voice in the midst of this climate? Like in terms of your work, why do you feel it's important for us poets to use our voice and to speak up in the midst of this climate?
Well, I was actually thinking about, because when I'm going to do an interview like this, I really have to start to think about a lot of things, like why I'm doing this, for instance. And, I also think about without the arts, civilizations crumble. That even as a math teacher, I would always have poems in my room on the walls. We would talk about the arts, and there was always, it was always not just math. Math is actually can be extremely poetic in its nature. It can just be beautiful. But for me as a poet, I think it's very important. I think it's very important as a person for me to be able to express what I'm seeing and to my opinion. If we keep silent, it's there's always talk about this. Anytime someone is being bullied, they're actually, which is what I feel a lot in our society right now, Noel, is that there's a lot of bullying going on. Right? There's three groups of people. There's the bully, the victim, and then the bystanders. I cannot be a bystander. My whole life, no matter what I do, I got to step out there. So now I do it with my work. And sometimes it's really scary, like you put it out there, as you know, it can be really scary to put it out because you're not quite sure how it'll be received. But the other side of that is silence is just, it can be deadly right now. I mean, when you mentioned book banning, it's like, it's extraordinary that we're in a time that we're banning books in this country. It's just extraordinary that our reproductive rights are now on the slashing block, that the Supreme Court today decided that Texas should have the right to enforce at the border right now for the moment before they hear another case or whatever they're doing. And they're allowing, immigrants to be stopped and searched, and all of these horrible things are going on, and we have to keep talking about it. We have to keep saying it. Unfortunately, it comes with, I feel like it comes with the territory. So that's my feeling on it. As I said in the beginning, I'm an educator, I'm a writer, and I'm an activist. Always, those three can't seem to be separated. Yeah.
Yes, I agree. I believe Nina Simone said it best, that it's an artist's duty to reflect the times. And I think as poets, we do have to share in that responsibility with giving our points of view as to what we observe, because it's not just for us, it'll be for the ones that come behind us, the future generations, as you're fully aware with poets of the past, Robert Frost, Rita Dove, Maya Angelou, Nikki Giovanni, poets that are still with us, poets that have already left, but the books are their legacy. And the same as with our books, our books will be our legacy that we leave behind. So, I share your urgency, and I agree with the importance of using our voice to speak on the things that matter to us,
Mhm.
where we can develop that connection with our audience and even bring attention to issues that, people may not already be aware of, because we're all part of the systems and, things that are taking place, whether we want to be or not. And as you say, we can't just stand on the sidelines and just observe. We have to take action. And one of the ways we take action is with our words. We can use our words to make a difference.
Yeah. When I'm really feeling really down, sometimes it's other people's poetry that will help me survive the moments. So I always have stacks of books around me, poets, so I can say, oh, and it doesn't have to be it doesn't have to be a political poem. It could be anything. It could be looking at the beauty of the earth, so that it gives me some hope again, it's important.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm in full agreement. And with that, I believe that provides the perfect segue to our next segment, because now, ladies and gentlemen, it is time for Margaret to take the mic. So at this time, Margaret, you're free to do up to 5 poems of your choice, just to show our audience your poetic stylings and musings. So at this time, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So I'm actually going to be reading poems from the book I had mentioned, Even the Dog Was Quiet. The first one is called Undocumented Roots. The night my grandparents' house caught fire, everything burned. A single cigarette lit cotton curtains. One child saved when thrown from a window. All possessions and money stuffed in mattresses and hidden. Everything lost. Pictures, papers, links to their past, consumed, turned to ash. The fire department arrived too late. Friends, relatives replaced material things, bags of clothing, food, a place to eat, beds for 7. They would not, could not ask for government assistance. Birth certificates, marriage license, traces to the old country gone. Vulnerable, fearful immigrants could not prove who they were. Old villages crumbled in earthquakes. The Irish priest married them, but would he say so? Somewhere, someone knew them in their community. Everyone whispered, no one asked, no one made trouble. Keep quiet, tighten the circle, remain invisible until the end of your days. And then the next poem is Risk, the one I'd been talking about a bit. And again, this is what the book was centered on. I told the guy who answered the phone all those years ago we were 30 minutes outside Denver. Needed a place to stay for the night, maybe longer. The rest area payphone was cleaner than the ones back east. No scent of urine, and the plastic booth wasn't scratched with someone's initials and lopsided hearts of misbegotten lovers. I wiped the mouthpiece with a tissue, even though it smelled like cleanser. I preferred the earthy odor of people's germs. The guy that answered the phone was a friend of a friend. I called him John. He said his name was Radar with a New York accent. John was his roommate. Yeah, he said, come by. You can sleep in the basement. I didn't mention the dog and hung up the phone. Katie and I stood by my 77 brown Chevette, deciding if we should do this or not. 2 20-year-olds driving for 24 hours, calling strangers from the road. Why were we here? Even the dog was quiet. The dog took up most of the car, by the way. She was big, but she was a great dog. Yeah. This one is called The Family Bank. The 1927 little red brick bank with white marble counter services my town. Bankers in black suits sit at large maple desks cleaned by invisible workers who labor after hours. Clerks in gray skirts and white tops work behind polished bronze grates. Velvet maroon ropes accentuate cues, and oversized adding machines swallow inputted numbers, producing paper ribbons. Mom dresses well on visits, slides cash into envelopes, greets tellers by name. I know lunchtime lines on Friday, paydays are long. The bank opens at 9, closes at 3, and shuts down on weekends. Heavy stampers mark my first passbook at 10 with loud ka-chings. Deposits duly recorded, lollipops rewarded. Yet behind forced smiles, the pain of patrons sneaks its way into my childlike view. Frozen accounts, unavailable money, loans denied, men in fedoras angled down, women clutching black handbags that snap shut, children led by hand, escorted to exits by security guards. The day my father dies, Mom applies makeup to visit the family bank, emptying their safety deposit box and closing accounts before our secret can be discovered, her grief wrapped into one tight ball. Weeks later, when I returned from college, Mom tells me they offered condolences as she comes clean. Did they know when we went that day? I asked. Sometime after Mom died, I returned to the bank. May I help you? An employee inquires, the ambiance severe and plain. Men still seated at desks and the women behind bulletproof partitioned, gendered roles. None know my name or recognize me. Just looking, I say, and blush at my stupid remark. After an uncomfortable moment, a security guard follows me out. I drive out of town, back home over the bridge. It's funny, we were talking about censorship, and this is actually dedicated to all the educators for us to teach in an age of censorship. It's called Remembering Life as a School Teacher. What is it like to teach? Like squeezing through a constricted corridor, growing tighter and longer with each step, inching sideways wide enough for one. You don't believe you'll make it. Then the bolted door is magically thrown open. At first, you expect the worst, walking steadily, gaining confidence, swinging arms, bending legs as the passageway expands. Before beginning a new school year, you turn to see what remains from the past, like lint floating in rays of sunlight, years of evaluation, scrutinization, demonization, scapegoating, low morale, tears, desperation hover above. You may have done more for the children, but adults stood in the way, lucky to start again, but mourning the loss of missed opportunities. Time to move on before sorrow locks your heart and soul for all you could not do. And the last one is called Impudence. I can touch my rage at the world, festering below the surface of my prickly skin. If I scratch myself with my fingernail, I can reach it. This rage boils my blood and picks indiscriminately at my sinews and muscles as I build a fortress against benevolence and merriment. I resist logic and dog reason and wisdom that comes with good sense, all that drained from me now, forever depleted, and what is left in its place, taking up space in this rage at the world, at my world, unfathomable, immeasurable. Thank
Wow,
you.
excellent, excellent. Ladies and gentlemen, those were powerful selections from Margaret Saraco. Margaret, once again, thank you so much. Those were excellent
Thank you.
pieces. I thoroughly enjoyed your work. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Awesome. Now we're going to shift gears again, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to move into our Q&A portion of this episode. Oops, sorry about that. If there's anyone in the audience right now that has a question or a comment for Margaret, you are free to unmute yourself at this time and share your question or comment.
For final I need to pay more. I need 3 boxes.
If anything, I can start it off.
Okay.
Margaret, when all is said and done, what would you hope to accomplish with your work?
What do I hope to accomplish? I think I want to be able to share my writing. I want to be able to meet writers and expand our global art community in the only way I know how. I think I want to help try to heal the world, one poem at a time, maybe. You know, we might not be able to solve the problems of the world, but at least I'm hoping to create a space where people can come together and talk about things. That's what
Absolutely.
I'm hoping. That's a lot,
Absolutely.
right?
It may be to a degree, but you know what? It's possible. And
Yeah.
every poet is different. Every poet has a different approach to their work and their audience. But I believe it may not necessarily be a lot. It's a worthy goal to reach for. I'll say it's a very substantial goal that I think it's worth reaching for. Definitely.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Definitely. Are there any poets currently that grab your attention?
Oh, I just love reading. So I love Jericho Brown. I don't know if you know his work, so fabulous. Ocean Vuong. I've been reading more Rumi lately. There's an Irish poet who deals a lot with all of the intricacies of language. He's Irish. His name is Pedro Tuma. And then there's this fabulous woman. I actually did a workshop with her. Her name is Jenny Chi, I think you pronounce her name. Fabulous work. Yeah, so I've been anybody I can read, any new writers coming along. And of course, all my friends that are writing. There's so many people I know. I just keep buying their books. It's so fun, yeah. But I find their work inspiring, on so many different levels.
Excellent. Now taking your experience in the poetry community overall, where do you see poetry going? Like what direction do you feel the poetry community as a whole is going to?
What we're going through or where we're going?
Or where we're going to, I should say.
Okay. So I have to say that when I started to get much more serious about poetry, which is probably about 30 years ago, poetry was not at the center. It really wasn't. It was people had very old ideas about what poetry was. And oftentimes when you talk to people, it was what they learned in school and they didn't understand it and they felt distanced from it. I think over the past 30 years, there's been a resurgence like I could not believe, which is so exciting. So I think that is a wonderful place to be in, to be able to be writing in this community that has been building over the past couple of decades. I also think that people are writing much more genuine work. I feel that I'm learning more about people's cultures, and that can be anything, right? It can be whatever culture you attach to, and I can understand it better through poetry. So I think we're going in some really great directions. And at the same time, the world is kind of off its axis. So I think poetry is one of the things that's supposed to reset it, with all of this, as we've been talking about, all the crazy things that have been going on in the world. And maybe that's why it's also become so important, so central.
Definitely. Now let's talk about accessibility. Now you're more experienced with poetry than I am. You've experienced some things, you've been around for quite some time. You have seniority and experience. And speaking from a place of experience in terms of poetry being accessible, do you feel poetry has always been accessible, or do you feel poetry is more accessible now than it was, say, maybe 20 or 30 years ago? Like, what's your take on that?
That's interesting. So first of all, I never said seniority. It's funny. I always feel like I'm brand new at this.
Okay.
Mm,
You know, it's just, and it's actually a good feeling to feel kind of new at something all the time. But I do feel like sometimes we're reading, like for instance, if you're reading Shakespeare, during those times, people understood it very well, right? We're trying to interpret it, interpret the language. And it feels off-putting for some people because they can't code it, they can't decipher it. I do think there is a movement for people to really become more conversational almost. It doesn't mean that the poetry can't be lyrical or whatever form you choose, even if it's Sestina or Villanelle, where it's really formulated. I think that there's a desire to connect with people in a different way. There's, you know, and that does have a lot to do with even though there were a lot of people writing, it was very, whoever was in the canon. Somebody said to me the other day, what's the canon? It's really great. It's not in our speech anymore, but the canon was what we all had to learn in school, and they were usually white European male writers. So now we're changing that, right? So I think that's part of the shift, that we are, when we break that, we break all those rules. Now it gets exciting, right? We're really starting to attach to writers who are not just white male European, patriarchal often in their presentation. So now we've got, you know, people from different ethnicities, we've got different genders, we've got everything. And that's one of the big changes. So I think we're going in a better direction. And I think we're starting to be able to really talk through poetry.
definitely. Now, if you could collaborate with any poet, living or deceased, who would it be and why?
Okay, you asked tough questions. I'm just saying that. So, you know, it's funny. There's a poet, I know her. She actually wrote a blurb for my book, but she's out west. She's an indigenous poet from, I think she's in Idaho. Yeah, she's in Idaho. Her name is C. Marie Furman, and I find her work extraordinary. And I find her extraordinary. And I think one time I'm just going to have to make that happen, because I don't want to have to not work with somebody who's here. Her work is, she really takes risks in her work, and she writes about so many things and is so supportive of writers, and she's just an incredible person. I'd love to give her a shout out and say, you know, one day, I've done a few workshops with her, but I'd really love to it would be interesting to do a collaboration with her. Yeah. Maybe we'll make that happen.
Excellent. Yeah, that will be something awesome to witness, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Are there any subjects for poetry that you haven't tackled yet that you're considering taking on in the future?
There are actually different forms I've been trying to play around with, which I think will lend itself to different subjects. I'm starting to get the feeling that I want to play around with things that are much more disjointed on the page. So when you hear them, it'll be one thing. When you look at it, it'll be not necessarily that. And I don't know, there's something about that is intriguing me lately, because I think it's in response to the world that feels very disjointed. And so I'm trying to find the thread to come back to that, to say, well, you know, sometimes I'm writing and it comes out to be very balanced. I like balance too, a math person. I like balance.
Right.
I like symmetry, right?
Right.
But I think there's something about being discordant, about not being symmetrical, about like taking it off and making it askew. I want to play around with that. Yeah. So I think that will tell me the subjects I want to write about once I start trying to create that. who knows what it'll be.
Right, excellent. Yeah, definitely. There's a level of mystery to it that that provokes you to pursue. That's definitely awesome for sure.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, for those that will be watching this episode, what piece of advice would you give to an aspiring poet, or a person that's already been active in poetry? Like, is there one piece of advice that you would like to share?
Yes, it can be really isolating, as you know, like to write at home, right? I mean, this is why this is so fabulous, honestly, because it brings you out. I would also tell people to attend readings, read at open mics, meet other poets. The poetry community is really quite warm and inviting. And I think that is the one thing I did. I really jumped into that made all the difference. And you try out your work. Sometimes it doesn't go so well, but that's okay. Like you're out there and you're reading, you go, wow, that didn't go over so well. I wonder what's going on with that piece. And that's really helpful information. And if you don't want to read right away, you can just listen, just go to readings. Poetry is really oral. It's an oral art form as well. We gotta
Right.
remember. Just like I know you interview musicians as well, it's just like you got to get out there and do it, right? You got to be
Yes,
out
exactly.
there. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely all about circulating yourself and making those connections for sure.
Yes. Yeah.
And having that sense of community that's very important as a writer and a poet for sure.
Yep. Absolutely.
Now, do you have any events coming up that you'd like to announce to our audience?
I'm overbooked. I do. I'm going to be in Manhattan at Otto's Shrunken Head with the Neuronautic Institute featuring with a couple of writers. And then on April 8th, I'll be at First Floor Walk Up in the City, which is it's like right around Soho. It's at First and First. I'm going to be if you're a New Jersey writer or reader or fan, I'll be at the Book House in Milburn on March 28th, doing a piece with Paul Rabinowitz on storytelling and prose and poetry. I'll be hosting, and that's a great opportunity for anybody that wants to do an open. I'm going to be doing a workshop and hosting an open mic with the platform, and that's in Madison. I'll be virtual with Calling All Poets. I don't know if you know them, but they're a great organization. They do virtual opens, and I'll be featuring with them. And tell me when I should stop. I got a lot of stuff going on.
Oh, sure. Do share.
Okay. I'll be in Hartford doing a piece with people that are reading about the environment. And then I have a play that I wrote a monologue for. And this is a wonderful piece. It's called Healing Voices, Caregiver Stories. And every year they have writers come together, and I submitted a poem, and they turn it into a monologue. They have equity actors performing it, and it is an incredible performance. It is so moving. So I'll stop there though. That's a lot.
That's excellent. It's good to have a full calendar. It's good to have a full calendar.
As you know, sometimes we got to take a break though, right?
I agree. No, you're definitely correct. I'm actually looking forward to having a full calendar again. You may have seen my announcement that I plan to return to the stage next month for Poetry Month. I thought that would be so fitting to return during Poetry Month. So I'm very excited about that. But that's definitely great to hear all those wonderful events you're taking part in. That's awesome. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thanks. It's been fun.
So in addition to your website, margaretsaraco.com, can you share where you can be found on social media?
Yeah, I'm on Facebook, Instagram, and all of that. If you go to my webpage, I have a Linktree address. You can even put in Linktree plus Margaret Saraco, and it'll come up, and then everything comes up on there, where to buy my books, my social media accounts, and feel free to connect. I love when people like we connected, right? We were reading together a while ago, and I think in Washington Heights, maybe.
Yes.
And just staying connected is fantastic. I love to connect with people, so please do.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, before we close out, there's just one more thing that I like to do. And that is to say thank you. First off, Margaret, it was great having you back. Awesome conversation. And as always, your poetry is excellent, very inspiring and thought-provoking. And I wish you all the best with your future endeavors, and congratulations again on your latest project. Up next, for episode 20, I'm excited to speak with two members of the poetry group. I believe it's called Poetic People Power, if I'm not mistaken. I'll be speaking with Chanel Gabriel and Tara Bracco on Monday, March 25th at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. For more information about Poets for Purpose and the P.W.P Sessions podcast, you can call me at 646-372-6230 or email me at poetsforpurpose@gmail.com. All of my logos and flyers were designed by the awesome team of at Eclipse Graphics. You can find them on Instagram at signeclipsegraphics.com, where you can see samples of their work and connect with them for your projects. Lastly, those of you wishing to make a donation, you can do so through PayPal, Tap Media Man, $Anointed Pen, or Cash App, and through Zelly, utilizing my phone number. And that concludes this episode 19, ladies and gentlemen. This episode will be uploaded to the Poets for Purpose YouTube channel within the next hour or so. So be on the lookout for that in order for you to share it on your social media channels. Margaret, good to see you back. Good to have you back. Thank you again for your time. I enjoyed the conversation and the poetry. Outstanding work. And I look forward to connecting with you again soon. Thank you for stopping by. Good night, everyone, and God bless.
night.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.